When you open yourself up and it helps others, authenticity does not hamper and hinder others. Authenticity connects you with others. So if it connects you with others, then it's a good thing. If not, keep it to yourself.
This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm your host, Justin Rothling Schofer, and I'm going to buzz through this introduction because our guest today and I are going to have such a powerful conversation that I believe is going to change and move you to the core. And if you've been here before, you've been here for maybe 20 episodes, 50 episodes, maybe the whole 277 episodes. I don't know. But if you have, be sure to leave a review, be sure to leave a comment if something has spoken to you. And I guarantee you in today's episode, it's going to move you and it's going to change your perspective and it's going to shift you from a state of normal and a state of ordinary to a state of uncommon ownership so that you can lean into what is truly required to live a life that's different. And we know that success lies on the other side of different, and that puts you in a state of uncommon. And that's what we're seeking and that's what we're after. And so after hearing today's episode, if you like this, if it moved you, if it spoke to you, share it with somebody. Share it with somebody that's going to speak to them, because that's how we ultimately can reach the world and create impact at scale. And so this individual that I had a conversation with, and we've got a whole bunch of recording stuff that we're going to dive into here. But I met him at an event with John Maxwell, and it was high capacity leaders that we're bringing in. And it was really unique when you get in a room like that you can really start to see people kind of just get weeded out. And things that they'll say, the things that the way they carry themselves, the way they act, the way they behave, the certain level of confidence, the egos, but then also the desire to serve in the hearts. And so when you have a certain heart posture, that will always differentiate you from somebody else. So you don't have to figure out, hey, how do I go into a room and differentiate myself? Your heart posture will do it. And I lead with that. And I say that because our guest today really has that ability when he's in a room. And I think that's what brought he and I together and just created this kinship as we started to lean in. And so our guest today has just done amazing things, is really focused on helping leaders become impact-driven leaders and helping them to really understand what you need to do and what the difference is going to be to make you successful, but successful in alignment with what your calling is. And so, Tyler, it's so awesome to have you on the show. And I thank you so much for spending some time with us today and pouring into our community.
Man, I'm excited to be here with you. Excited to just spend time chatting. Here's, be honest, we've kind of, back and forth a little bit, chatted, text, voice message, this and that. But, it's been a couple months now since we spent that time together. And whenever you're in those instances, yes, I appreciate from you, you start to get a little bit of what people are about, but yet I've wanted this just because I want to dig deeper and I want to understand. But it's also one thing that you hit me with, when we got started here, and as you got started, start to get chills a little bit, just because as we were chatting with before the open, we're about to get deep in an area that I think is very heart-centered for you, but that has been a major transformation for me. And so as you said those things about how I presented myself in August, I know that's only because of the growth and transformation that's happened in me. And I actually got a text message from my wife regarding that today, something that she's seen in me. And part of that is, instead of being in rooms where you're trying to justify who you are, it's better to go into rooms and find out, how can I serve others to bring out the best in them? And that's been a change and transformation for me. And so I just appreciate that either you saw that in me or you recognize that that's my aim and desire.
Oh, it's beautiful. And that's exactly what it was. It's the fact that you're not trying to posture yourself or not trying to position yourself. It's just, hey, this is who I am. This is what you're going to get. Yeah. And as you are humbly showing up in a powerful way. And sometimes you look at those two words and they can be create a real heavy dichotomy, but there's this deep association to humble power And when you think about that, I just think when I think of humble power, I think of Jesus. And that's like just this cool component to this, where when we are able to step into a room, and I'll go through there, one of our pastors gave us this amazing 10-step component to when you're stepping into any single room. And one of those things is to serve the person that's least expecting. And I think that was just the coolest thing that continues to stay on my mind is you're serving the janitor, you're serving the person who's serving you food, or you're serving the person who holds the door or cleans the shoes or whatever the thing is. And so when we were in those rooms, you just noticed that like that was where certain people really went to, is it didn't matter if John Maxwell was in the room and it wasn't a show. Didn't matter if the CEO was in the room and it was a show, or if somebody they wanted to make an impression on was in the room and they had a show. It's just, hey, this is just who I am and this is just how I'm going to be. And I don't know who you are, but I'm just going to introduce myself and build a relationship with you. So that's something that I appreciate and something I value. So as we kind of lean into this. And guys, today's episode is going to be very conversational. And when I talk about conversational, it's going to really be just Tyler and I going deep on a lot of these contents. But before we do that, I really want you to kind of frame yourself, Tyler, because you talked about a couple things here. There was a pre-ownership Tyler and a post-ownership Tyler. And we really tell stories on this show of people who have made ownership theirs. They've leaned into this concept of ownership, of the intersection point of accountability and responsibility, and ultimately realized a life that was different or uncommon on the other side. And so I'd love you to give our audience kind of like a 30-foot view into what does pre-ownership versus post-ownership Tyler actually look like.
Man, we're getting deep right to start, and part of it is, hey, man,
we don't live on the surface here. If you want to live on the surface, go out to the ocean and grab a surfboard, and then you're good.
You start with an appetizer, and then you move into whatever the next course is, and then eventually you get to like that 6-ounce, like perfectly, marbled steak. Let's just be honest, that's what I'm eating. Okay, at that point, that's what I'm having. Some type of I prefer grass fed. I own cows. I raise cows. I like grass fed, whatever. You can be on your own. All right. So for me, where that started, and probably the real marking point of my life, and again, this is where deep, is when I was 14 years old. I grew up on a farm, was raised on a farm in Northeast Ohio. It's a dairy farm. And it was June. And that time of year, we're baling hay. If anyone's familiar with farms in the summer, especially, that's normal. And my chore that day as a 14-year-old boy was to make sure the wagons that we used to carry the hay were properly greased, tires aired up, all those things. And as I was doing that, I was having a hard time maneuvering the wagon. So I decided to use the truck that I was pulling it with, drive it around and try it again. And off to my left-hand side, I see my younger brother, who is 3. His name is Joel. And I wave at him. And, I continue to drive around, turn around, and I look back, and he was laying in the driveway. And I had driven over him. And he died. I was 14. He was 3. And this is what I'm saying. It's starting deep, right? And where that moment in time is etched in my life, it's what I speak about today. Because soon after that, we call the emergency personnel, whatever else. And I'm standing in front of the barn where our cows were at. Again, dairy farm, we had about 50 cows. And I'm talking to the sheriff. And he's looking at me, just like I'm looking at you. And he's asking me questions. And I'm looking at him, I'm staring straight in the face. He's sitting on the hood. I'm standing up. I'm short at that point. And I say to him, hey, you can ask me whatever question you want. But I'm going to go into that barn. I'm going to milk those cows right now, because they're not going to do it themselves. So you got more questions, you can come with me. And I say it that bold and almost flippantly because that's how I remember responding. Now, granted, I'm 44. That was 30 years ago. And yet it's something etched in my soul and being. And it only was revealed to me a couple of years ago. That's how I dealt with things. When it was difficult, I just put my head down and push. And that level of intensity started to be who I was and how I showed up. So that room you talk about in the past, very much my insecurity would show up, and I'm intense. I'm trying to justify my value, my knowledge. I'm trying to just be this thing that I wasn't sure what I was. And it was usually my intensity that got me through it. And so the real ownership of that moment came about 25, 26 years later. For the sake of the story, we'll use 25. And I'm sitting down, just got done working out, sitting on the bench at the gym, in the locker room. I open up my shaker cup, I pour water in it. I have my post-workout shake and I start to drink it. And I have this audible voice tell me, this is how you deal with things. See, at that point, we had owned a gym for several years and there was just conflict. Trainers, just any other business, normal stuff. And how I was dealing with it, I was just putting my head down and push. You either get with me or you get away, right? Because I'm going to push through you. And when I think about own it, as you share that, I had to start owning how I was showing up to people. And more importantly, the barriers that I started to put around myself. And intensity was one of those big barriers. And what I learned is it was a bulldozer and I would just push through people. And if you think about a bulldozer, you push through things and it either levels it or pushes things to the side. And that's how my relationships were. I mentioned to you just a few moments ago, the text message that I got from my wife. And I'm going to read it. It's personal, but I think it's meaningful exactly to what you pointed out. And she said something, I'm actually really proud of you. You didn't used to notice people's energy towards you. I think you have softened to become more aware of people's emotions around you lately. That's a huge step. I'm being very kind and serious with this. That's from my wife. That was less than 2 hours ago. Because I was telling her about an interaction I had with someone. I realized something's off. Something's not right. And see, part of the journey that I help leaders go through is owning how they show up to people. Because the reaction you get in a leadership perspective, you got to own. It's not always about them. I was the bulldozer. I caused the problem. And I was like, what's their problem? That was me, because I was dealing with any type of frustration, anything coming at me by intensity. So when I think of own it and that journey, that transformation, that's what I think of.
First off, just thank you for telling the story with that level of authenticity, I think, because it's obviously it's a heavy story, something that really shapes somebody and changes somebody.
Yeah.
And you said something very powerfully that I don't want you to miss this, listeners, because I think this can be I often talk about asking yourself better questions. And if you can ask yourself better questions, it ultimately is going to empower you to seek better answers. And the question came from the statement, this is how you deal with stuff. And the question would now become to you is, how do you deal with stuff? How do you deal with and replace stuff with whatever you might be? How do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with your spouse? How do you deal with your coworkers? How do you deal with your best friends? How do you deal with a failure? How do you deal with success? How do you deal with your health? Like, how do you deal with something when it doesn't go exactly as planned? And as Tyler so eloquently put, it requires a deep level of ownership, an ownership mentality, a mentality that you're able to look back in the mirror and say, hey, what is my role in all of this and where does it come from? But it stems originally from having a high level of emotional intelligence and a high level of awareness as to what that looks like. And so, Tyler, talk us through a little bit about what that moment in the gym did for you in terms of generating awareness for maybe the first time in your 26 years from 14 to 40. But what did that time differential between 40 and today, what has that process been like for you? And what have you started to put in place to bring more awareness and some tangible growth to yourself, to where all of a sudden you get a text message like that from your wife?
Yeah. So I think the bigger part, obviously, I think of that unique story. We all have stories. We all have situations, but I look back at that unique one, especially because my response was intensity. Now, part of the growth, and you said, as we talk about this, what's been the difference and changes? I was realizing that relationships, those people, those interactions around me, they weren't going great. Sometimes it was great. I love connecting. I like being around people, but then all of a sudden there comes this rub. And I first learned about it is starting to think about why does this happen? And so it really became a part of, what I help guide people through, myself through what I do. But as well, it was really a moment that every single one of us have some type of insecurity. And for me, my insecurity showed up, as I mentioned earlier, is I would go into a room and I tried to establish my value. Now, if that didn't work, well, then I became intense. And see, that started to put in together this framework for me where I've identified the 4 barriers of leadership, I call it. It's just things that I had to work through. First was insecurity. It's like, how do I show up for the people? And that just builds a wall. And, it's really understanding, that issue between us is my insecurity. So when we talk about what's been that change or what's been that growth, it's first of all recognizing, okay, I can own these insecurities. And it's very important to, because I know what happens when I interact with people. They know it. They know when my insecurity is showing because of their reaction to me. And so when I talk about leadership and I talk about leaders and I express to them, hey, here's the thing. You may think no one knows your insecurity. We all have them. I have them. You have them, Justin. Sure. We all do. We're human, right? And yet the moment you say, hey, excuse me, my insecurity is showing. This is what I'm doing, that I'm trying to, bolster myself or kind of create acceptance by you or in relationships. The other person's like, thank God, finally you admitted it. Like, we've all known it. Now you admit it. Now you own it. And that was a process for me of admitting it and owning it. Very much, hey, it's on point today, right? I didn't know that I would use ownership and own it so much. Gosh, Justin, you have really framed this in, but it really was that. And, that's what I think is imperative for leaders or anyone, is starting to own that insecurity. For me, a facet of that insecurity was intensity. Here are the other 2 that I recognized would happen to me and that I had to grow through. And they were insensitivity, meaning, Justin, you're dealing with something, whatever. It doesn't bother me. I don't care. And that's another wall that I built around myself. It's like, dude, that's your problem. I'm going to keep on going. Revert to intensity. Be insensitive, go to intensity. And then the other one is inactivity and just choosing to not deal with it. Almost be apathetic, to say, I don't want to have to confront Justin about this because it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. So recognizing those actions, either my insecurity was showing up, I was being insensitive, I was, just not taking action, or my intensity. Those are the things that I started to recognize in my relationships and how I interacted with people, and realized, those are the problems. See, that's why I'm not able to guide, lead, influence, connect with, be in strong, intimate relationship with others, because those things were popping up. So when I refer to the message my wife mentioned earlier, it's because was that insensitivity much of the time, or I was just so focused on doing something else, I would just go do the other thing.
Yep.
That was a process because the ability for me to lead was hampered. And the relationships around me were not healthy. And I realized I got to get healthy. I know I talk about health in a physical, it's a spiritual, it's a mental, but it's an emotional way. And if you're not healthy, and if you're not aiming to be healthy in all 4 of those, then you're not connecting with people. And I believe that's very much aligned with what, you're about. And it's, again, this same, there can't be too many of us saying the same language, because it's often not heard. And so it starts to come from a perspective where we hear it. And that's just been an ongoing and continual journey. And I now realize the best way for me to continue to grow my own is sitting here and having conversations with guys like you that made me stop and think about, all right, here's how far you've come, but then realizing I still know I got a long way to go.
It's good. I love it. And even coming back to that, and audience, you've heard me say this before, but mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, the body doesn't know the difference between these. And to be healthy means to be holistically whole and having everything inside. And if, as leaders, I've obviously got a book coming out in April, but the book that will follow that is called Leaders Heal First. And it talks about creating this mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional healing internally for leaders, and developing a life that allows for that to happen. Because as a leader, if you're leading with wounds, all you're doing is bleeding all over everybody else. Yeah. And it's time that we actually created scars from what it is that we've gone through. We shouldn't be ashamed of what we've gone through. We shouldn't shy away from it or hide from it, but rather heal it so it can become a scar, which now we're able to take from our experience and put into how we show up in front of others. And so it's so heavily aligned in that concept and in that framework. When you look back at what you've done with those walls that were built, you talk about walls of intensity, walls of insensitivity, and walls of inactivity or apathy. What did you have to do, or what was your main points? What process did you go through in order to start to break those walls down? And knowing that you're still working on them, we're always a work in progress, but what process did you have to go through, especially as a man? Because it's I think oftentimes we see on social media I call it toxic masculinity.
That's a great way to describe it. We're in the same. Yep.
So
absolutely. Here, let me show you my guns and let me show you my knives and let me just show you how aggressive I am, because that's stop.
Yeah. And I have no problem like calling it out in the areas. It's the Bedros Keuilians, it's the David Goggins of the world that continue to say, stay hard. If you're not working, if you're not pushing, if it doesn't hurt, you're not doing anything that's worthwhile. And it paints this picture and provides this front that that's what leadership looks like as a male, when in actuality, if we actually dug deep, they're all leading from a space of insecurity that lives 100%. Within them that they haven't ultimately dealt with. And they're a leader with a wound that they don't want that wound to be shown. And just by ultimately leading, they're bleeding all over everybody else. And just the fact that they have a loud voice and a platform and something that's been developed is a shame, because that's what we're ultimately hearing. And so it kind of comes back to what we talked about at the beginning, was somebody said to me about the stages that I've been on most recently. And over the course of the last year, I've been on about 80. And they said, well, with these, like, what have you taken away? Like, what's the one thing? And I just said, man, I feel sad. Like, I truly feel sad, because a lot of the messages that I see, and when I come around, it's like, there's just so much inauthenticity. There's so much hardness. There's so much in your face. You'll use your word intensity. Yeah. And there's a difference between intensity and passion.
Oh, now we're getting good.
A massive difference between intensity and passion, where intensity comes from a place of insecurity. Intensity comes from a space of woundedness, because when you poke intensity, when you poke a wound, intensity comes out.
It's going to come after you. It hurts. Yeah.
Versus when you poke a scar, man, it strikes a chord, and you are passionately speaking about the growth and the breakthrough and the overcoming of what's been there. And you're so excited by it that you're like, you can overcome this too. And I want to pull you with me, rather than intensity. I'm going to push you into something because you have to do this.
I saw it from someone, I can't recall right now who it was, but they described intensity and kind of this intense person that they look to kind of model after. And it was Jesus. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that's a take on intensity. And I think very much the words you use there, the difference between intensity and passion is, to me, what it's aiming to accomplish. See, I believe intensity, by virtue of it ends up pushing people away, right? It's that bulldozer effect. Passion, which honestly, in my opinion, leads to compassion, brings people together. Here's one thing that it's what I've had to work through. And this probably needs to layer in back with what we were discussing. How did I evolve and grow? And one of the great realizations that I had is the way to overcome my insecurity was being more empathetic. And yet one thing that I found out is most people have no clue what empathy really is. And it's so misdefined and misunderstood. And they're like, being empathetic is just being soft and palpable, and just you sit there and cry with someone. It's like, no, that's not it.
That's sympathy.
I don't believe that's it. Yeah, exactly. But yet even those two words are so intertwined. You're like, what's the difference? And that's when I came up with this. And again, it's, hey, none of this is for me. It's all from God speaking through me. And I understood empathy is putting your arms around someone and walking with them. And if I think about Jesus as a model, you brought that up earlier, and just kind of thinking through that and that passion, man, if I'm walking with you and my arms around you, I'm making sure you're not falling, and I'm encouraging you to say, we got that. Let's go. Like we're doing this together. Right. But I can't drag you. I have to encourage you. I have to be with you, and I have to put my arm around you. In one thing that I think back, and again, as a person of faith, that's shaped much who I am. I think back about the being unequally yoked. We stop and play this out, right? If we're walking, I put my arms around you. I'm a little taller, but yet you're a little bit bigger. All right, we'll make this work, right? And if I think about that, if I try to pull you and I have my arm around you, I'm going to choke you to a certain extent, right? I'm going to, pull on you. You're going to pull your head up. If you do the same, you're going to unequally pull me over. So we have to be walking in tandem. And I think that's so imperative with empathy. I can't walk faster than you. You can't walk faster than me. We have to walk together. Here's another model piece where I've understood that. I have some friends that are Navy SEALs, retired Navy SEALs. And I was talking to them one day, my podcast, and I was like, hey, who didn't make it through BUD/S? They're like, oh, that's easy. The one that tried to do it on their own.
Yeah.
The one that tried to fight the surf on their own. And it gave me this image in my friend Matt and I, as we were discussing it, it said, so the guy who survived, not the guy that lauds, which, it's funny, some of those guys do not have a great opinion of the person you mentioned earlier because he was all about himself. He was not about the SEALs. And like the SEALs are some of the most empathetic, caring, like guys that I know. They will do anything for anyone. They're all about taking care of each other because they learned in that day, if I'm holding on to the log and if I need to survive, then I need to be vulnerable, open my arms up so I can link arms with someone else. And if it's all about me trying to prove myself worthy because someone told me I was never worthy, then I'm making it about me and not, am I going to take care of the guy next to me? Because the most important thing that I've learned in life, much less if you're in theater, is I need to rely on you to take care of me, and you need to believe that I'm going to take care of you.
Yeah.
And if we're going to go through life together, it has to be that way. Yeah. So you have to have that open vulnerability. You have to have that empathy for each other, whoever you're guiding and leading. And it can't be driven by intensity. I'm going to get through that wall, whether you come with me or not. Dude, that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
That just means you're a bunch of, like you said earlier, bloody, scarred up, bloody wounded people that you've not gone through the healing to allow and recognize, yeah, we all have scars. Here's something to tie this back. I know I could be very cold, hard, calloused because of what happened to me and my brother, right? I know I could be. And for many years, in a lot of ways, I was. But I'm very grateful for this. And it's only divine. It's something that's happened since the moment. I've never been riddled with guilt from that day. And some people I share that like, seriously, really? I'm like, not once. But I only have one person, one being, one figure to give that to. And that's God that said, you're not, it was an accident. You did not do this. It did not mean to happen. Because I know if I had that wound of guilt, I wouldn't be able to sit here and talk about it and say, hey, I still had to work through that wound and scar so I can sit here and talk to others about, I know what it's like to be so armored up that my insecurity shows up and let me just show you how tough I am, or my language and I'm just effing this and effing that and just, no, that's just gross insecurity. Just sit here and say, hey man, Justin, I'm just glad to be sitting here with you, man. I'm glad to be having a conversation with two people that care about a lot of other people and just want to share and help them, and not, well, let me show you how big and strong and wonderful. Get over yourself. It's not about you. Now, can the lessons that you've gone through in life help others? 100%. But and again, that I had to grow through that. I did. I had to get over that insecurity.
As you continue to kind of come back to, what does it mean to lock arms with somebody? What does it mean to walk through something with somebody? I think oftentimes, especially as leaders, we are exposed to so much quote unquote empathy now, and exposed to so much authenticity and vulnerability. And I love all the work Brené Brown has done in talking about vulnerability and openness and how this is a superpower. But again, with social media and everybody getting a voice and speaking to it all the time, there's a very fine line between vulnerability and authenticity. and positioning and posturing, if you will, or excessive vulnerability, where it's just airing everything out there for people to come from. And something that I was exposed to and I was taught, which was just so powerful and profound looking back on it, and this was just as a young boy, was being taught that vulnerability and authenticity is a powerful trait. It's what allows people to connect, what allows people to come into your world and just connect at the heart center with you. But how you determine the level in which you go to is either you show all of yourself to the people closest to you, to your spouse, to your best of friends, to your parents, to your siblings that you can like really connect with at a deeper level. But what you put out on social media, what you put out to the world in a podcast it's things that you're working on that you've already had time to process. And you're not processing things in real time in front of everyone for the world to see. That's not authenticity. That's not vulnerability. That's not the openness that we're having here. And I think oftentimes we see it where it is the opposite, where it's constant and we just open up, more things on vulnerability, more things on openness, more things on authenticity. But yet, because it's trying to be done, because it's trying to be worked on, because it's trying to be positioned as that way, it immediately becomes inauthentic.
Well, I think, you mentioned earlier the toxic side of it. Toxic being the unhealthy, the not, I would say unimpactful. It's impactful, but it's usually for the wrong reasons. And I think, so much of that I identify. And one thing that I had to learn and go through is I did not understand earlier in my life the impact I had if I walked in a room. So if I walked in a room and I was cold, I was callous, how that affected the energy in the room, I just didn't understand. I believe every single person has that. Some people more than others because of their makeup, their demeanor, just how, general society reveres them, right? And I never understood it. And I remember where I was in West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and I was at an event. And actually, I walked in the room that morning and I realized I do have an impact because I could walk in and just be dejected, just off on my own, or I can come in and I can connect and I can engage and realize, okay, that is powerful. Now, the difference is if I walk in a room and it's almost, these are all the things that I'm dealing with, and I put that heavy weight on others, then all of a sudden that vulnerability and authenticity does not help anyone. Now, if I were to walk in that room and I'm uplifting and I'm encouraging, but yet, hey, I'm still dealing with things because I'm human too, it gives other people hope. And I think I often talking to leaders, I remember I was coaching a soccer team earlier this summer. And we were talking about leadership. And I asked like, hey, do you guys think leadership is lonely? And one of the players is like, yeah. And I'm like, but why? He goes, well, because it's on you. And I'm like, only if you make it lonely. Only if you choose to separate yourself. Now, leaders have to deal with things differently. They have more responsibility sometimes. But if you put that all on your own and separate yourself, then it's going to be very lonely. And I think it comes back to what you're saying. And I tied in with my image of empathy. If I'm dragging you down, that means my vulnerability, authenticity is not uplifting, not helping you. But if I can say, hey, Justin, yeah, you know what? I understand what you're going through. I get it. Like there's some heavy things we got to wade through here. We're walking through that together and not like, well, yeah, I know you're dealing with that, but my son is this, my daughter's that. And so all of a sudden that starts to like pile on. Like, no. Now, if you and we're connecting and you're asking more and you're like, hey, how do you deal with this? Like, all right, right now I'm dealing with my son and he has this. And you're like, okay, you get what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, well, let's solve this together as opposed to me dumping on you and you become the dump truck and I want you to carry it away. And that is such the fine line that we need to learn and understand what's vulnerability for connection compared to vulnerability for offloading, because there's a much big difference. There's authenticity for connection, and there's authenticity where I'm just going to air all my dirty laundry because I have the free reign to just be whoever I want. And as I'm saying that, and I'm thinking about this, healthy authenticity, valuable authenticity, I would say proactive authenticity, means when you open yourself up and it helps others. Authenticity does not hamper and hinder others. Authenticity connects you with others. So if it connects you with others, then it's a good thing. If not, keep it to yourself. It's just a dump on them that they don't need. And too often we find that where leaders wrestle with that. And people that are led, it's like, well, dude, why should I be leading him? Because he's an absolute just mess. It's not about being that. It was like, hey, even in my mess, and I got hope. I got hope because of my faith. I got hope because people around me. And all of a sudden that authenticity is like, oh, that's uplifting. That's not downtrodden. That's not dumping. And that's a huge wrestle. And I think that's why we need people like yourself to help people discern and say, oh, okay, I can lean too far one way or the other. That's the path that I need to follow, and owning it, but yet not owning it to the point of like, oh, this is just all about me. Does that make sense without getting into too many words?
For sure. No, definitely. And I think everybody's got their own journey. And as you're on that, being able to understand, hey, where are my wounds at? Where do I need to lean in? Because that's ultimately the determinant of health. It's not just the six-pack abs or the muscles or the nutrition and exercise component. It's the holistic integration of mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And when we get our order right, it's crazy how everything we've been chasing all of a sudden starts chasing after you. And so let's really make sure that we're diving in and continuing to lead in that capacity and in that area. And so I love asking this question, but if I was to ask you, Tyler, in a word or a phrase from somebody who has developed and learned how to live in ownership, what is the definition of ownership to you?
Ooh, definition of ownership is it's on me, not on someone else. Yeah, and to define that a little bit deeper is, that's very off the cuff. Is you think about ownership, it's mine, and I have to determine the direction it goes. And I think we often find in life, and to circle back from a leadership, or if we go overall holistic health point of view, there's always circumstances. There's circumstances that, oh, okay, it's difficult for this or that. Yeah, it is. But own those circumstances rather than making them excuses. And I think that is a kind of a connected point here. Is there's always going to be a circumstance that could be an excuse, and owning it and saying, yeah, it is the way it is. You know what? Sorry, dude. I like to sleep till 6 o'clock, right? I have to own and say, I don't, but I'm just saying, if you do, like, whatever, that's cool. But instead of owning it and saying, yeah, I like to, great. Then I need to adjust my lifestyle some other way. That's fine. Instead of fighting it and saying, I couldn't go to the gym this morning because I was so tired that I slept till 6. Like, who cares? And I think that is part of that showmanship that we are evolving from, thinking this is the way it needs to be. It's like, no, it doesn't. If you're, we're quickly getting into a generation that has been said into, people that are working, soon becoming adults, that were asked during a period of time, hey, work with us. We're trying to figure this out. Work with us. And so now all of a sudden they're adults, or they're early in their career, and they're used to having that certain amount of autonomy. And now we're saying, no, you no longer get that. And they're like, well, what do you mean? We don't know any different. And they're like, well, you're entitled. I'm like, no, I was given this authority. And now it's all of a sudden saying, hey, what do you want to accomplish? This is what it'll take. You own it, right? You own, hey, you want to grow in your career. You want to be able to, be more fit. All right, well, start to figure out how that is. But you can't sleep till, 9, show up at the office at 10, want to be gone at 4, and saying, hey, can I continue to grow and develop, when you're limiting your interaction with others? Because if everyone else is there from 8 till 5. Yeah, go ahead.
I just always say your outcomes are simply a lagging effect of your habits, behaviors, and actions.
Yeah.
And so it's that deeper component that I think is really clear and open to that. So Tyler, as we kind of close up here, where can people find you? Where can they get connected with you and just be able to, again, gain more access to you if they so desire?
Yeah. So a couple different ways. Podcast, the Impact Driven Leader podcast, that is up now. 3 seasons have been recorded. up and coming 4th season. I'm excited. Some adjustments there. It's going to be even more impactful. TylerDickerhoof.com is my website. Releasing here this winter, have my signature course, the Impact Driven Leader course, which is a journey of what I kind of discussed today. It's awakening as a leader. It's growing and it's leading the journey that I've gone through, that I've worked through with others, and providing that to people. So thanks for an opportunity to talk about that. But it's really just YouTube, Instagram, podcast. Here's the thing that I want to leave with, and I know this is very much who you are too. I'm not an expert at any of it, but I'm just growing through it. And I know what's most enjoyable to follow and be around is people that are on the journey too. And that's where I look and say, yeah, I've gone through some of these things. I've grown through some of these things, but I've also realized, as you and I have talked too, there's a lot of people struggling with the things that I've struggled with. And we've both identified them, and being willing to be on the journey because I haven't figured it all out yet will keep me from saying, hey, I know it all. Because when we get there, man, I'm of no value to anyone.
That's good. So listeners, as you take this away, I don't know whether you're listening in the car, whether you're listening working out, whether you're just listening at your desk or going for a walk. But I'll start with the question of, how do you deal with your stuff? Are you building walls? Are you building things around you that are holding you back from actually creating connection with people, actually being able to step into a whole body, whole self environment where you are truly healthy? And are there areas that you've ultimately created wounds that just have shelters around them? And when you've got shelters around your wounds, you can only be pushing people away. You can only be leading from a space of intensity rather than from a state of passion, a state of scars that have been built up, healed through, and that journey that you've gone through to ultimately create some different changes. And so as we step into the process of admission and being able to take ownership of these things, that's when we can step into what we're truly called to. That's when you can step in and be truly impactful and be holy and healthy, because that's what matters at the end of the day. And we know that we're called to be different. Success is different. So own your different. And we'll see you guys next week.